Welcome to Lab Notes. I'm Joe Fetterman with Colliers Life Science Real Estate Advisors, and we're here today with Matt Hewitt. Matt is the Executive Director of Scientific Solutions at Charles River Labs. Matt, welcome to Lab Notes.
Hey, Joe, thank you for having me.
Well, it's great to have you here. You and I have chatted about this before. We have some Birmingham, Alabama in common, and to top that out, much of your career unfolded right here in Philadelphia. Let's pause for a minute to just establish your Philadelphia credits here.
Right. No, thank you. Yeah. So I moved to Philadelphia in August of 2011 for a scientist position of a small startup that was focused at the time on the innovation of the airways and opioid-induced respiratory depression along with sleep apnea. I did small molecule development with them for several years before going back into immunology, which is where my PhD is in. And I worked at UPenn for a bit under Jim Wilson, running the immunology group for him and leading several dozen AAV gene therapy programs. Once I left there, I took a quick break from Philly, moved to Houston, where I did a lot of cell therapy work. Ultimately, came back to Philadelphia for several years, where I worked for Lonza and helping them to build a new business unit which was focused on cell and gene therapy.
Well, the exciting development here, Matt, is that you're now over at Charles River Labs, and you are one of the guys that is making the cell and gene therapy programs happen there.
Yeah, no, it's been a really exciting time. So I joined Charles River about 10 or 11 months ago to help integrate their cell and gene portfolio. Over the past 2 or 3 years, Charles River has undergone a significant transformation from an organization that was primarily focused on safety assessment and toxicology studies and biological testing to a company which now has a concept of commercial cell and gene portfolio, including things like antibody discovery, cell supply, target screening, full CDMO services from pre-phase one to commercial. And when you include that with our existing biological testing to enable real-time product release, as well as of our safety assessment toxicology, we have a really nice portfolio that can accelerate and streamline cell and gene therapy programs for various people.
Matt, one of the things that you communicated is that in addition to overseeing operations at facilities, you're also one of the key guys that's advising executive leadership on where the field is going and staying ahead of that. What are the things? What's that causing you to look at to stay ahead and really position Charles River to be best suited for clients?
Right. So Charles River does not do any therapeutic development ourselves. So when we look at the field, we have to look at it through a bit of a different lens in that what are the key enablers that are coming to the field and what does that look like? I think for cell and gene specifically, the field is still fast evolving and we're still trying to find what works and what doesn't work. So when I look at that and others look at that, we typically divide it into some buckets. And so we look at things like what are the key enabling technologies that help us advance the field. So, for plasmid, a lot of off the shelf plasmid offerings that we will be coming out with shortly, as well as viral vectors and producer and packaging cell lines. And then looking at cell therapy manufacturing, we already know there are some sensitivities around the costs of manufacturing these cell therapies. And so we're looking at placing not bets, but definitely getting involved with different developers of technologies that we believe are promising to help lower manufacturing costs, which have a direct impact on therapeutic costs, and then ultimately have an effect on patient adoption of these, potentially curative therapies.
Matt, you've just had a recent announcement about a new consortium that Charles River Labs is getting involved with. Let's talk about that for a sec.
Sure. So yesterday we announced with several others that we had joined a consortium with Multiply Labs out in San Francisco. So they are working to close and automate the cell therapy manufacturing process, primarily using linear robotics. So we have joined that consortium that includes Multiply Labs, UCSF, Cytiva, as well as Thermo Fisher to bring that to life. And again, the intention here is to try to lower the manufacturing costs for these cell therapies such that we can get increased patient adoption, as well as lower just the human needs that we have for these manufacturing processes. So as part of that consortium, Charles River is actually contributing some of our microbial testing equipment that we make, primarily the EndoSave, which does endotoxin testing, as well as our Celsis, which does general sterility testing. And those are both required for the release of cell therapies. So we believe that by combining efforts and collaborating across different disciplines, that we can have a larger effect than if we were to go at this alone.
Well, thanks, and good luck with the new initiative.
Thank
Um,
you.
let's circle back to Philadelphia for a second. You really have a unique perspective on Philadelphia in the cell and gene therapy field, and Philadelphia's place, and also the trajectory. And I'm curious if we can talk for a minute about that. Where you see the future for Philadelphia, how you see Philadelphia as it measures up to some of the other important clusters. Um, I'd like to hear what you're thinking about that.
Right. So, I mean, I think in general, I think Philadelphia is well positioned to continue to lead in a lot of areas, specifically in cell and gene. We have a great base there in the institutions, whether we're talking about University of Pennsylvania, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, Drexel, Temple, or Jefferson as well, Villanova, all provide a great base to provide qualified folks coming out of those institutions that can feed into a lot of the roles that we're looking for to advance these programs. I think additionally, because of that, a lot of the innovations, and certainly Kymriah is, or CTLO 19 as it was called when it was at Penn, is the first autologous cell therapy that was, approved in late 2017 against cancer. I mean, there's no first is first. I mean, there's not another first. So, we really do have a feather in our cap there. And I think so because of that, a lot of innovations have come out of Penn. We've seen various companies spin out of Penn, and I think Philadelphia has done a good job in University City in building out a lot of the infrastructure that's needed. So you cannot, once these companies come into existence, they become, part of, industry. They can no longer necessarily live within UPenn or CHOP or anywhere else, and so they need space. And I think that the city and investors have done a good job in anticipating and building out that space. And then the other thing about Philly is that we not only had the first commercial cell therapy, but we had a Philadelphia company do the first commercial gene therapy as well. So Spark, a spin out of CHOP, commercialized Luxturna against inherited retinal blindness, and that was again another big feather. So I think it's a really unique place in that not only do we see the first commercialized cell therapy come out of Philadelphia, but we saw the first commercialized gene therapy, and that has attracted a lot of people to the area, which is good. I think Charles River, we've invested in the area as well. We have a very large biologics testing facility, which is just outside of Philadelphia in Malvern. And so when we talk about doing biological testing or manufacturing cell banks for other work, I mean, that is a lot of times where that activity is happening. So, we are big investors in the region.
Yeah, and in the context of the other major clusters, we've talked a little bit about talent and the depth of the talent pool in Philadelphia. How do you see Philadelphia stacking up in terms of the ability to support the growth that all these clusters are seeing? How's that looking across the national landscape to you?
I mean, I think Philadelphia is in a good position primarily because they're not in a unique geographic location where they don't have the ability to expand. And I think within the city, there still is a lot of area to grow. I mean, we've seen that, up near Temple, out in University City, even outside the city at Jefferson and Villanova, where, things can expand. We have room to grow. We can also grow up. Not every city is as comfortable with, air rights and building multi-story buildings. But I think Philadelphia is, obviously. And so I see that as a great plus, because we're not limited then by zoning requirements or folks not wanting these things near their yards. I'm sure there are still those people out there, but the point is that we have, I think, a populace as well as local and state governments which understand the criticality of expanding these industries, because they do provide a lot of value to the state and local communities, as well as certainly the patients that they're looking to serve.
Matt, we've talked a little bit about Philadelphia as an emerging bioprocessing center, and we've also talked about the idea that the demand for talent, not necessarily PhD talent, but also talent that on the floor, is going to increase as the facilities expand. And you're seeing this in other markets. How do these life sciences clusters, and Philadelphia in particular, keep up with the demand for folks on the floor who are well trained to execute the manufacturing processes?
Right. So I would say there's a couple avenues we can take. One of which is, I would highly, suggest that folks who are in a smaller biotech or even medium-sized biotech, and even potentially large pharma, because we work with all different segments of the field, reach out to folks like us that have capabilities and decades of experience in manufacturing these therapies. Because I will say it is, in the grand scheme of things, and easy is always in context of what the other activities are, but it is easy to build a facility and put equipment in it. It is quite hard to fill that facility with people and the expertise needed to manufacture those therapies. And so by coming to us, we can help you move through those steps in the program development, whether it be manufacturing at phase one, phase two, or pivotal and commercial, without the need to build, your own facility immediately and staff it with a bunch of people. I think on the other side, we talked earlier about the Multiply consortium collaboration. I think one element we have to look at is, how do we better automate manufacturing in general for cell and gene? And what that will do in some respects is decrease the number of people that we may need for particular processes. And I think there's probably a two-step way to do that. There's a way, and there's a progression when you go to clinic. So as you're going through and creating that value inflection point for a company, dosing that first patient, dosing your first cohort, getting through your phase one, that manufacturing process may look quite different from something that then goes to late phase and commercial. And I think, again, we have the experience to guide you through that. That ultimately at commercial, we need to automate better, which reduces the number of people. I think we need to also have a conversation about, what are we looking for in people that are going to be doing the work in the suites? And traditionally, what we have done is err on the side of caution and recruited folks with a minimum of a 4-year degree. And I think if we're going to truly scale manufacturing and meet the needs of larger patient populations, say in solid tumors and in oncology, or if we get into autoimmune, there are some quite large patient populations there. We're going to need to rethink the way that or the qualifications for the folks that we're bringing in. And so I think there we need to have a conversation. Does a 4-year degree make sense? Do we go to a 2-year degree? Do we need a degree at all? Do we need a technical certificate? Because really what we're looking for is people that have the right attitude, that can follow a standard operating procedure, and takes direction well.
Well, that's really helpful commentary on that. Matt, I know we could talk all day. I know you're keeping a busy schedule and you've got a lot going on. So thank you for joining us with Lab Notes, and we look forward to talking again very soon.
Yeah, always happy to be on. Thank you, Joe, again for having me, and I appreciate the questions.